ladies and gentlemen. It's another episode of Sludge Underground podcast. I'm your host, Nasiphi, and I'm here with a brand new guest. It is Keenan John Meyer, one of the greatest pianists right now in the country, and I'm super privileged and excited to be having this conversation with him. Brother, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Nah, all good on my side. It's as I say, it's a privilege, to have you on the show, and it's been a long time coming. Made this booking a while back.
Yeah. I'm surprised that we're here actually. November
Yeah,
came
but I
quick.
mean, I'm super grateful. Definitely, I mean, time flies. How has this year been for you? Actually, 2022. Would you say it's been a success when it comes to you making music?
No, absolutely. I think this was sort of a harvest season for me. So I think all of the work that I really had put in over, I would say, the past 5 years has culminated into something really beautiful. And yeah, my biggest manifestations being realized. And I think I'm just more excited for to create more, to experience more. Yeah, just this creative life force that has come over me in the past year, and it's a beautiful experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, in 2021, I think you gave us, the alchemy of living,
Yes.
which was very solid. You had some really solid names on there. One of them being Zoe Madicha as well.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out. We had her on the show, and your name came up, and I think that's how I got the idea of like, well, we
Mm,
need to have a conversation with Keenan Meyer.
nice.
And tell me a bit more about, the experience, when it came to creating, that body of work. There's
Mm-hmm.
so many tracks on there. And I think it's a fresh perspective as well because you never had just like an instrumentalist type thing. So what are sort of the dynamics when it comes to putting something like that together and having, the piano take the lead in a way and then have everything else and everyone that features on there, add to that sort of element.
But I had no intention actually of being a recording artist. My main focus when I left varsity was since I'd majored in academia, I didn't actually think I would be, recording and performing like I am now. So the experience I think was firstly a lesson for self to really get into the thick of things. Really, when it comes to identity, when it comes to capabilities, self belief, all of those themes played a very big part in my success in firstly starting the project because it was a lengthy process. It was a lengthy process, and just the determination and the courage that one would need to put out a body of work, especially if it is being released in a genre that um, is not really associated with you. Like jazz music. As much as I engaged it, I was not trained in the jazz idiom at all. So to come into the space and see people's reception of it was just heartwarming. But the experience, I would say, was just, oh man, I don't know if anything can encapsulate what it feels like to give birth to something like that. And I use birth because it really was as if a child was being nurtured in the creation process of it. So a lot of it started in 2019, I would say, after varsity. I'd done a lot of traveling, a lot of soul searching, really. And what was coming out was my truest self, outside of playing Bach or Beethoven for university. Now I had the opportunity to completely play around with what my own sound would feel like, first of all, and then sound like. And that process led me to go deeper and deeper and deeper into searching for themes from childhood, themes of early childhood into um, high school and now into varsity. And I think all of that just came together so beautifully. And in 2020, when the pandemic hit, um, like I had initially planned to move from Johannesburg to Cape Town. I just felt it in my spirit that I'd like to be near the ocean, number one, but also just the change of scenery. But then COVID happened. I had a bit, like I was about to move into such a beautiful apartment in Sea Point. with my dog. And when COVID hit, it sort of forced me to remain still, and just that lesson of being still rings true to me post COVID. Just being still and allowing intuitively messages to come to you. And I think that's what I fully um, surrendered. I do speak of the surrendering in the album as one of the themes. And I think once that process started, it was inevitable that it would be a catalyst to something of, I would say, this force, because everyone I engage with on the alchemy of living, I truly have no words sometimes. And I don't think I'll get used to it. People coming up to me to say thank you. You don't know what the alchemy has done for me, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. Um, so I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's really what I can say about putting it together.
Yeah, I know you've definitely answered that really well. You went really in depth, and there are a lot of points to touch on there. Like initially, when you mentioned
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
being in varsity and having to play, Bach and having to play Beethoven and such. The crazy thing is you never really hear. I mean, did learning and having to play that sort of music in varsity have any
Yeah.
positive impacts on what you ended up playing as yourself, as Keenan Meyer? Because I'm trying to think like with say for example a hip hop artist. I'm
Mm-hmm.
yet to hear a hip hop artist who's like in high school we used to
Mm.
learn about Shakespeare and his writings or poetry or whatever inspired my raps and such. So would you say that doing like playing that sort of stuff that you did in varsity had any impact on the artists that we actually see now?
Absolutely. I think what the classical school taught me um, was really how to, because, studying to solo classical piano, it's a very one, well, let me say, it's a very solitary act of music making. And so with that, I really did travel to other places when I'm playing, like it allowed me to just use my imagination, especially when it comes to the sort of characterization of motifs. If we look at Mozart, he's very clear with that. And I'm thankful that I had such a good teacher who brought that out in my playing and made me aware of what was actually happening when we play certain notes. It's not just a note. There's so much that is hidden behind, and so much that the interpreter, as me playing, can articulate to whoever's listening, but also to also get behind the notes, you know, and actually try to discern what the composer was trying to communicate. I definitely think there's been so many positive things with studying classical music, and one of them for me, well, not one of them. This is so many, but I think the one that really stands out is studying Beethoven, because I think his music, in every sense, captures the human spirit. Um, and there are so many examples of how the interpreter can have a new sense of self, new sense of being, just by engaging that work. And now, Anazia, my final recital comprised of the Grand Sonata by Beethoven, which is an absolutely stormy work, mainly because his temperament is very clear throughout the entire work. So you have these soft moments of of music, and then these intense, erratic, you know, and just to be able to articulate that as the artist performing his work, I don't know, that teaches you something about tonal painting. It teaches you something about the philosophy of sound and how we can then employ that in our own work. And so I do draw a lot of inspiration from that type of teaching. Um, and I'll give an example. So Daniel Barenboim, who I think he just turned 80, one of who I consider um, one of the pianists who has mastered the reinterpretation of Beethoven, specifically when it comes to the piano sonatas. He wrote 32. and he was giving a masterclass to Lang Lang, who's a also a Steinway artist, concert pianist. And they were, I think it was the Sonata in F minor, number one. Da, da, dum, da, da, dum, da, 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 da. And in this, like as Lang Lang played through, and then the masterclass started, he stopped him. And so one of, I would say, the key features, perhaps, of Beethoven's music is his stark contrast in dynamics, right? So you like next to or even in within one bar, you'd have this fortissimo, like this loud, loud, loud moment, and then subito piano, immediately soft, perhaps on the next note. And Bamboin then says to Lang Lang that that is the moment where the performer has to completely trust themselves to go to the very last point and be so vulnerable and in that way also not give it away to the audience of what's coming. And so when we look at examples like that, I look at examples like that, also from, I studied piano methodology. I majored in it in my honors here, to look at it from that point of view, and to see the type of lessons that go beyond the music, um, surrounding vulnerability, surrounding um, courage to go to the very last point of that fortissimo and then pull it back. What does that mean then for how I would then employ that in my own music? And I see perhaps a element of that in healing. I think it's track six. Yeah, track six. On the Alchemy of Living, where I build up to this massive, massive, massive climax and then completely pull it back. And that for me is, again, just a sum of my teaching, when we consider what Beethoven has done in his work and how he really was a revolutionary. I mean, he was the first in the classical space, also someone who sort of was a bridge between the classical period and the romantic period because of the type of compositional techniques he was employing. And that daring attitude is why we still talk about him in today's time. Yeah.
What would you say makes a pianist, different from the next, considering that we're looking at, someone that is playing an instrument as opposed to maybe a vocalist where what, say, for example, Beyonce sounds like, what Christina Milian sounds like, for example. Yet when we're looking at an instrument, how would you say, Keenan Meyer differs from, someone else that plays an instrument? What are those sort of key things that one would have to listen out for? Are you able to identify?
I think there are elements that we can sort of draw on. I would say tone being one of them. Obviously, being in a conservatory type of setup, I was exposed to many pianists, and not everyone has the same tone, and it's very distinct. And I think I have a very warm tone, and I've been told I have a very warm tone that is, I think, quite distinct from what my peers would have sounded like. And I say this purely based on listening in on their own playing, I'll mention Korean pianist Brian Bay, excellent pianist, very bright sound, especially when it comes to perhaps Scarlatti. I've heard him play some Scarlatti, and that to me sounded completely different to what I sound like. And that moment, it was clear for me to then distinguish that there are definitely distinctions in sound or tone. I would also say a key feature of my work is my texture. I draw again from the Romantic school of thought, especially when we consider musical characteristics and how they employed these massive, grandiose chords, which I resonate with. One of my big influences in that regard is Rachmaninoff, um, who has written some of the most beautiful, beautiful melodies I think the world will ever know, to be honest. So I think that those elements, and specifically in my music, the use of the pedal for me is not necessarily to change harmony. Yes, it is to change harmony as it is intended on the piano as part of the mechanism, but I employ it under, you know, I also was a very, very, very I still am. Let me not say I was. Still very, very devout scholar of Debussy, Claude Debussy, who's an impressionistic composer. And in the impressionistic school, specifically where the piano's involved, the pedal is used to blur harmonies, which is, if you look at their contemporaries, Van Gogh, Claude Monet, that type of painting that you can only view from, standing a distance away. And I employ that type of pedaling in my work. So that might also be a key defining factor of my work is my use of the pedal, which is not the strict classical change on harmony, but also allowing space and freedom for a different type of soundscape.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. We've had, quite a few, artists that sort of come from similar backgrounds, where you'll find that, they're also into varsity and they, studying music and such. And you'll find that most of them right now, in conjunction with, being artists themselves, but you find that they also teach. Is that something you'll ever maybe dabble into? Because I mean, just looking just from your Instagram, for example, besides how dashing you look in terms of your fashion sense, one
Thank
can
you.
see that you're very well traveled. Anytime one can see that you well traveled, and obviously you're doing the most when it comes to shows and playing piano and pushing your projects and such. So teaching, is that something you'll ever maybe jump into if you haven't already?
I absolutely do teach. I first started teaching at Crawford in Pretoria doing I mentioned that I majored in piano methodology. I would be very, very irresponsible if I did not employ what it is that I taught, especially because I come from such a good school, you know? So I did teach, and then I stopped for a bit because I then went to present research um, at the University of Graz. This is 2019 when I stopped. And then great, 2020 happened. 2021, I recorded, released, and was performing. And then this year I started again with having some private students, which I'm actually very excited about. It gives me purpose, especially to see the growth of the kids and adults that I'm teaching. Um, yeah, we all have to. I think I come from too much. I come from a strong lineage of teachers. My teaching ancestry or my educational ancestry is Dino Lepati, who is a Romanian classical pianist who taught Betsy Kluver from the University of Stellenbosch, and Betsy Kluver taught my professor, Joseph Stanford, who also taught my last teacher, Dr. Ben Skuman. So, based off of all of that, I must, if I didn't, share the knowledge because there's a lot of knowledge to share when it comes to playing the piano and also what and taking up this instrument can teach you in terms of discipline and all of those things that I mentioned regarding courage, self determination, etc.
I mean, how do you actually juggle everything that's going on? The traveling, having to, look after yourself as an artist, and then also having to then teach. There's also the stuff that we don't see on social media that happens, behind the scenes. One of the things that was said by Mani Badu is that it's sort of like, when you're an artist and you're sort of in the public eye and stuff, it's all good and stuff, but you also have to then switch off at some point and just go back
Mm-hmm,
to being a human being type thing and not keep
mm-hmm,
up appearances at all. So how do you juggle that and make sure that maybe one doesn't encroach, on the other?
mm-hmm. I would say that I'm incredibly organized. And this is just, since high school, I've always been in order when it comes to scheduling, when it comes to deadlines, when it comes to, deliverables. I have a very strict schedule, and I do prioritize. If there's work to be done, it will be done. But doing so in a way that is fun. Also, the work that I'm doing does not feel like work at all. Like that's I think the exciting part. I schedule, I make lists, I make the smallest lists, everything, scratch it off. I believe in, the power of three hours on your biggest project, three things that you're grateful for, and three short-term tasks is sure to get the work done.
That is a very great tip, just for anyone who's listening to that. There, it's something that I've actually never heard of that, so I need to actually try implement it and see what the results are. Because I mean, you're doing really well, so it's definitely working there. And now looking at the traveling as well, Keenan. Obviously Asia, South America. Is there anything that you take, from those experiences and those places that you've traveled to that you incorporate into the music?
You mentioned South America, so Santa Teresa that opens the Alchemy of Living is based on Santa Teresa in Rio de Janeiro. And I had the great opportunity of going there in 2018. After my final exam of my honors degree, I was on my way to the exam hall or the exam room because it was like one on one with the moderator. And I said, when I leave this place, I'd like to know that I'm leaving South Africa. So I booked a direct flight to Sao Paulo, and I was in Sao Paulo because I'd met two Palistas, brother and sister, Samuli and Igara Lorindo from Sao Paulo, and they were in Cape Town to learn English. And I'd been in Cape Town at the same time because it was the June workshop of the Mandela Rhodes Foundation. So I was in residence in 2018, and uh, the workshop, which also celebrated Nelson Mandela's centenary, was held in Cape Town. And I'd gone down a few days earlier because I went to go and perform a recital, classical recital, titled Reawakening at Youngblood Africa in Breed Street in Cape Town. And I met them, and it was like politics aligned. It was just a beautiful, connection with the language barrier a little, but we worked through it, and yeah, we just gravitated towards each other. And they then said they would come to visit me because I'd lived in Pretoria at the time, and I was like, no, come through, like, it can be cute. And they came, which was supposed to be like 1 week, ended up being, I think, close to 3 weeks of them staying over and just being within South African culture. It was so cool. And when they left, they were like, Keenan, you have to come and visit us. And I was like, say less. Like, I don't need no convincing. I am coming. And so that's why I gone to Sao Paulo, where I spent a week with their family, with their mom, their dad, their grandmother in Sao Paulo to be a part of Brazilian culture, which is also quite eye-opening. I then traveled to Rio de Janeiro, which is the most social experience as well. Being atop Two Brothers Cliff, which overlooks, Ipanema Beach, Copacabana. You can see Sugarloaf Mountain in the far distance to the left, where I was standing. And I was with a tour guide, and we just sort of started meditating. It was a moment of really being mindful of what I had just come out of with my university experience, which actually wasn't, it was good, but it wasn't pleasant because of, we cannot deny systemic racism, especially at that place. So it was, I won't paint it as all good and rosy. It was not that. And so that moment for me was just the moment of like, whew, coming back into the safety of my body. Then he was like, no, we're going to continue this sort of trip on this frequency, as you feel comfortable. And we then went into the Tijuca forest to go to see the waterfall. And he's like, take your shoes off. I'm like, oh, what? Did we literally hiking? Are you insane? And it's like, no, the intention is then to start grounding, doing grounding work, and grounding meaning connecting with the earth source completely. So yeah, I was in Tijuca Forest barefooted, climbing, and like when I say climbing, like there were cliffs, okay? We got then to the other side of the waterfall, to the other side of the waterfall, and at that time I had no understanding really of communing with the ancestors. Yes, it was a thought. Yes, I touched on spirituality, in my honor, but not to the point that I know it now and practice it now and understand it now. So when we got to the foot of this waterfall, there's just these offerings that were left, you know, inside the water, which that's candles, like bananas. It was so beautiful, beautiful offerings. And he then encouraged me to go inside the water, you know, and then there's no one. It was just us at this waterfall and this body of water that was coming from that. And he's like, go inside. And so I went, and man, for me, healing comes when I'm close to a water source as a water spirit in that way. And the feeling that I felt there, uh, I felt again when I went to do a river cleansing with my healer. And it was then when I realized what I had actually went to do in Brazil, you know, and what those waters held. And it's in honor of that moment. It's in honor of the moment that I had to reimagine myself. And now, yeah, a completely different person from who I was in varsity. And I thank my guides and I thank Spirit, that omnipotent life force that has created all living things.
How are you feeling?
I'm good. I'm drinking the greatest cup of tea. So
Wholesome,
that's good.
wholesome. um, are you a tea lover in general, or do you prefer maybe coffee?
I do like tea here, but I think it was a matter of age. I couldn't stand it. In like middle school, and like now, this is the only thing I want to drink. And made in a specific way, okay? I think that's why I don't drink tea outside of my home.
Are you saying that the older you get, the more you sort of attracted to tea?
For myself, yes. For myself, yes, I would say. Um, I've definitely, yeah, but I am a coffee person as well. But definitely tea at the moment is so healing.
What is the best tea brand out
Mhm.
there? Let's put them on.
I wouldn't say I have no idea. I can't actually tell you, but I did bring some tea from Singapore. It was like cinnamon infused with honey, ginseng, and ginger. So those type of infusers is what I'm slowly getting into. I know Woolies has an extensive range of tea, like pomegranate, you know, one of those. Yeah, but I think that's taking it too far. Personally, I do.
No, I feel you. I feel you. So just to pick it up, when it comes to your spirituality, is that something that you sort of discovered on your journey, or is this something that is maybe rooted to family somehow?
I come from a strong family of Christian believers, and it is very interesting for me to embrace this calling because people assume or associate it with being demonic, especially under the Christian doctrine. But that all is a sum of racist policies in the country. Example being the Witchcraft Suppression Act of 1957, which forced Ubungoma underground, and by virtue of that, um, was deemed as something evil, demonic, because it wasn't to the white man's beliefs. And so now I think we are experiencing this epoch because the bones of our ancestors are turning and our bodies are remembering, you know, and that's the only way I can really explain what has transpired. And the alchemy feels like the culmination of that project, that not project, but process rather, that I think started now when I think about it. For me personally, it started in 2012. And the older I get, the more my inner child is healing because I actually understand what was actually going on. It was deeply rooted, but it only came into my understanding of it, I would say from 2019, to be very honest. And it was because of guides in this physical realm that my people had sent me, um, who have carried me, guided me, to what I can now say I understand who it is I am and where I come from and who walks with me. It was a long journey, and I don't think it is not finished. um, Even this week was so intense in the sense that the maturity and the spiritual insight that is coming can be so overwhelming. Um, I think if you're not willing to completely surrender again to what is being asked of you. And that was a tough lesson to learn, but I learned it. And that's when I talk about surrender, I reference the last track, Eloi. I reference those words spoken by the revolutionary political figure Jesus Christ, not how he's viewed in the religious sense, but more of what that story is telling us about a human who defied the state. And he says, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I feel like even, as I spoke briefly about my experience at university, that felt like the turmoil that it caused in my mental, my spiritual, and emotional being. That's what I felt like. Why? Where are you? This God that I was taught of um, as a child. And now I think I view the topic of God in a bigger lens than what I had initially, um, engaged growing up. Now it's just, yeah, as I said, the spiritual insight that has been granted, um, and which I hold so sacred and will not share, has opened my eyes to a lot. And once you open yourself up like that, um, it requires you to be a change of you. That's what I can say.
And it's very beautiful as well that this is synonymous with music. It reminds me of what Zoe was saying when we had a chat with her, and that for her, it's not just about making music for the sake of making music. It's sort of like she's brought upon by, those who have come before her to be a healer through the music that she releases. And I'm really just glad that this is something that is sort of, this is something that you also live as well. And just all the experiences that you have as well being intertwined, with the body of work that you release and, you express to the world. Is this something that you sort of make with sort of like a conscious decision that the music that I make is going to be intertwined with the spiritual sort of realm, or does it just sort of happen naturally?
When I sit at my piano, something comes over me, and I, I think I'm still getting to understand it. But more often than not, it's the sacred state of flow that I find myself in, and that's how I create. It's just sitting and hearing, and when I am playing, I am communing. When I'm playing, I am praying too. Um, and the type of answers that come to me uh, while performing always shake me. It's as if, it's just like this clear directive of what needs to happen to the point of, this is a sacred state of flow. That sort of, I wanted to go in detail about the ways, but I shouldn't. If I am moved, as a performer, if I am communing while I'm performing, surely the audience around me will be altered because of that, as the alchemist doing energy work in that space, in that capacity. I think that's where you have the communion of spirits with everyone who's listening. Is if you believe it yourself. There was a sound that was lacking that I needed out there. I needed it out there. I needed healing specifically to sound like what it does. Like, referencing that big romantic orchestra of the 18th century,
And you obviously mentioned right at the beginning of the spiritual talk, the family being Christian and stuff, and then you mentioned this sort of thing being viewed as demonic, and obviously it's stemming from the systematic sort of racism and such. At home, how do they feel about your spiritual journey, if anything at all? I mean, you are a grown ass human being. I don't think there's much that they can do about it, but how do they
yeah.
feel, just about your spiritual journey and yourself in general?
I don't think they could dispute it when I was calling out stuff in the family that nobody has told me about. Also, prior to the alchemy's release, I feel like it was a test. I was tested. Um, one of my family members got really ill, and it was not a physical illness, it was a spiritual illness. And it felt like a test, like, okay, you've called on us, we've answered. Um, let's see if you're able to withstand what it is you're being gifted with. And I think I can successfully say that I listened, and the answers came in ways I will not um, elaborate on. But the answers came, and with that, I took on a different role in my family, um, as mouthpiece to the other side, as elder in my clan, also as someone who's the first in I don't know how many generations to finally make contact again after decades of silence, you know. And with all of those answers that I mentioned and the healing that was done on this family member, which we can claim success over now, really proved what it is that I'm called here to do. Over and above the music, there's a lot of healing of the bloodline and also contributing to thought surrounding intergenerational trauma. Um, so I think it's they can't dispute it.
That's brilliant. It's the fact that they can't dispute it, and that you also were able to assist in that issue that sort of came up is just I'm super glad that it ended up going well. Another thing that you mentioned as well was the systematic racism, obviously at the varsity, that you just stepping away from the spiritual sort of side of things a bit. When we're looking at you in varsity, you mentioned the racism there. What was sort of happening, if you can explain. And also, I think most importantly, we don't just want to raise issues and just leave it hanging. What was sort of like the solution? How did you sort of deal and cope with that for anyone who might be experiencing the same thing?
It started and I'm thankful that Feast Must Fall happened in my first year because what it did was outed those closet racists in the very department in which I studied. And it was clear to me then already um, that there's a different evil that is brewing here that torments the soul, truly. And how I dealt with that was I'm thankful for my thick skin, and not to internalize other people's projections surrounding my own craft. But one example was also just, using Afrikaans in a lecture hall where not everybody speaks Afrikaans. What exactly are you doing? Are you insane? And throughout the years, I just filed pockets. I'm nice because I want to be nice, not because I'm pandering or performing under your whiteness, which happens for the black body in white spaces. And I think the final straw for me was the conscientizing that came from being engaged with other scholars in the Mandela Rhodes Foundation, to the point where we were disturbed, we were unsettled by the status quo, we were unsettled by just blatant microaggressions, those microaggressions that make you question or completely just doubt yourself. Like, no, 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 no. Um, and I'm thankful for what that scholarship did over and above the funding of our studies, our on the studies, but the type of self-actualization that comes from being a Mandela Rhodes Scholar is second to none, in my honest opinion. And it was with um, that armor that I got from my peers and my scholars um, in my specific cohort, who are still like family to me today, is how I completely just I had no time when it. I think it was after the reconciliation workshop that I referenced when I spoke about meeting two polysters, in Cape Town. It was after that I became disturbed by the apathy and how complacent they are with just being okay with, upholding the status quo and upholding systems which do not allow the black child to be excellent. And then also putting white mediocrity and black excellence on the same foot. That disturbed me fully. It was then when I was just like, Let me get the marks and get out. Which is a lesson from my English teacher in grade 11, Miss Mila Goldberg. Get the marks and get out.
Shout out to her. And I'm really glad this is something that you overcame. Hey, like honestly, it's I can imagine, and also just having to balance that with having to study and ace everything and collect those marks and get out of there. It must have been a lot. Yeah, but I'm super stoked that there was a way and that you also found solace as well in, your peers, the ones that you mentioned having been, in unison with. So I feel like there's something to be learned here, that and you can literally overcome anything. And I'm super grateful for that piece that you just shared there. Coming on to a bit, lighter things as well. We're almost at the end of the show. What are the plans? We obviously I think this is the last episode that we've gotten this year on Sludge. So for you, looking at 2023, what are the plans? What can we sort of expect from you? Obviously, Alchemy was in 2021. Are you going to be giving us, a new body of work? What is happening? What can you sort of touch on?
I can touch on the fact that I think yes, the music will be there, and there is something brewing, but the creation process for me is not to be rushed in any way. And so I'm allowing this organic process to take its course. But there are melodies, motifs that have come streaming in. And so I'm just making sense of everything, all of these downloads that I've gotten, before I compile it into or create a tapestry of sound for the next body of work. But mainly, I think for me, releasing the alchemy has been an achievement of mine, but more of a karmic act that has been completed. And so I feel everything is now aligning towards going back into a research space, exploring that and exploring how, through interdisciplinary approach, we can understand the topic of healing, understand the topic of intergenerational trauma, as I mentioned before.
Before we close out, obviously, and get your handles and such, to any aspiring artists out there that may be listening to you, or actually an independent artist rather, obviously, as independent artists, a lot of them have come through and, obviously talk about having to juggle everything, having to, look after themselves as artists, but also at the same time run their own social media and having to balance both. All of a sudden, you now need to do marketing and all that there when your main focus is being a musician. And I feel like you're someone who's got a really wholesome balance when it comes to, your social media. It looks hella clean. You're doing a really good job. And at the same time, the music is still consistent. Are there any secrets or any tips that you have, when it comes to consistency, when it comes to, social media and having that sort of good balance between being a creative and then looking at the marketing side and handling that yourself as well?
I think love what you do, first and foremost. Love what you do. Like, stay in your lane. All of these things are mundane. Like, we say them, goes in one ear, goes out the other. If I can give any advice to any artist, or independent artist specifically, love what you do, um, and stay in your lane. Do not be phased, and you can't activate your gift if you are in comparison with someone else. That's where the problem lies. Completely stay on your own path. And then in terms of marketing, I've always had a knack for it. I served multiple council, like, student councils, where I did work, and I had the portfolio of marketing from high school days as well. I think that's also a matter of nurture and nature. But it's just this knack for marketing, pulling things together, being very disciplined in my organization of things. List scheduled down to the hour is key for me, and that's how I'm able to maintain balance and do everything with pride. Take pride in your work.
Very well said. And I really love how you with Keenan, something I've noticed is that everything you do is intentional. Like you aren't just saying this for the sake of saying it, because when you mention staying in your lane, this sort of makes me look at how you could have chosen to become a hip hop artist because that's sort of like the main thing. Instead, you were like, this is what I'm passionate about. This is where my calling is. Regardless of whether it is in the mainstream or whatever the case is. And you took it and you ran with it. And I feel like these are things that you've applied yourself. So even when anyone's listening to these tips that you just given out, I hope they know that these are genuine. So thank you for that, man. Really appreciate it. And thank you also for joining me on the show. I really appreciate it. For anyone who wants to maybe reach out to you or show some love, send some merch, work with you, or just engage with you on social media, what is the best way one can support Keenan Meyer? And secondly, what are your social media handles?
Cool. I think come out to the shows, eh? If you see a post, come out and you see for yourself. Not for me. I'm fine playing to 5 people because it means I've done my work. I call people into my space because I'm a conduit first and foremost. The hype is not my ministry. As said by my peer, Bokang Ramatlateng, the hype is not my ministry at all. Um, I think that's one way you can come and support is really coming out to listen to the music live. It does take on another energy when it is created in the moment. And then my handles Instagram at Keenan Meyer Piano, and then Twitter. I don't know how long Twitter's going to be around for, but at Keenan John Meyer. And then my email address if you'd like to reach out for work, collaborations, thoughts. Is info at keenanjohnmeyer.com.
Awesome, awesome, man. Once again, thank you so much, Keenan, for joining me on the show. To anyone who's listening to this, the episode is available everywhere, wherever you get your podcasts. And obviously, we've got our website, www.sludgeunderground.com. That's the portal to absolutely everything Sludge Underground. Thank you for tuning into this episode. Keenan, what is your favorite song on Alchemy that we can maybe close out with? It's an unfair question. But we need your favorites. We need your
Oh
favorites.
my God. What is my favorite? I don't know. They have their certain lifespans. Eh? I don't know. I can't actually. I don't know. Oh my God. Okay. I think I want to play Majora's Meditation.
All right, awesome. Guys, going to be playing us with that one. Please do enjoy it. Thank you for tuning into this episode. It's been myself and Keenan Meyer. Until next time, let's bye for now.